she's so passionate about her subject matter, and she's also writing about something that people are pretty unaware of, but that, is kind of devastating to learn. Like, it's devastating to learn that, like, all of your food is being poisoned, and, like, animals are dying, right? Which is a huge focus of the book. She actually spends 2/3 of the book on animals before she really gets to, and plants before she gets to humans. But I was just really inspired by the way she kind of took this topic that was so important to her. And even though other people weren't talking about it, even though the authorities at the time, both governmental and corporate authorities, were saying everything is safe, everything is fine, she was using the evidence that she saw, that she found through talking with other people, to create a story that said, actually, there's something else going on here. And I thought that was just such a powerful thing for writing to do, to expose kind of an aspect of our world and our existence that's going on, that that you can prove, right, that you can show, but that is so dispersed almost, that we're just not really putting all the pieces together to understand the big picture.
Hi everyone, welcome to Without These Books. I'm your host, Allison Roach. Without These Books is a thank you inspired video podcast that celebrates the authors, books, and characters that changed us as writers, readers, and as people. So today on the show, I will be interviewing Jenn Shapland. She's a writer and archivist living in New Mexico. Her first book, My Autobiography of Carson McCullers, was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award and won the Lambda Literary Award. She has a PhD in English from the University of Texas at Austin and is currently working on a collection of essays about the entanglement of toxicity, capitalism, and heteropatriarchy called Thin Skin. All right, so what is the book that you chose to talk about today?
Today, I'm going to talk about Silent Spring by Rachel Carson.
So, when did you first read this book? How was it introduced to you?
I remember reading this book when I was in high school. I took an environmental science class, and now I've recently reread it. It just kind of came back to me in my research, and I question whether I really read the whole book when I was in high school, because it's long and it's pretty intense. It's pretty technical in some places, but I definitely at least read the opening, this kind of fable about the silent spring, the spring without birds, and it had just a huge impact on me. I remember that whole class learning about environmental science. It was like, if in my high school we didn't really learn about some of the other, like, larger conspiracies of history, we didn't really learn about white supremacy, we really didn't learn about capitalism, but I did get to learn about some of what had been done to the environment. And this book just kind of hit such a nerve that I was that person. I became like the person who was like lecturing my parents about their recycling habits or whatever it was. Do you know what's in that stuff you're spraying on your plants? Like, I was so intense about it at the time. So yeah, it was really important to me at kind of a young age.
So, you said you revisited it. When was that, and why did you pick it back up?
Well, I've kind of come back to it a few times. I read it again in college because I was trying to be an environmental science major at first. And that ended up being really not the right path. I spent a long, like, semester studying corn rootworms, these like tiny little worms. And I was like, I can't do this. Ended up studying world literature instead. And then I came back to it again in grad school when I was working on my dissertation. And then it just came up again in an essay that I'm writing right now that's about toxicity. And I'm looking specifically at toxicity in New Mexico in terms of some of the legacies of nuclear weapons research here at Los Alamos and the Manhattan Project. So it's a different kind of toxicity, but I wanted to go back to this book to understand how she was able to write about something that was so difficult, something that people didn't want to see or look at, but she did it in a way that was like deeply compelling, even to me as a young reader, but also to tons of people when the book came out in 1962. So I picked it back up for my research, and then I kind of fell down a rabbit hole. I have like 3 biographies of her. checked out from the library right now that
Yeah.
I'm working my way through, and I've just kind of gotten fascinated with her life.
Yeah, I love that. So you said you were originally or initially a environmental science major and then you switched to literature. Was your choice to be an environmental science major influenced by your reading of this book?
I think it definitely was. I think one of the things that so impressed me, and it impresses me again, revisiting it and kind of understanding more about Rachel Carson's background and sort of what she was working with, that
Yeah.
her writing style was so highly literary, but she was writing about something that was not usually the subject of literature,
Right.
right? And that was also true in her previous books that I had read at the time that I'm kind of looking into now. Like The Sea Around Us, she's really writing about the ocean and marine life, but in this kind of lofty way that that mimics some of the other reading I was doing in high school and college. I'm reading like Russian novels and things, and she's like kind of bringing that voice and bringing that kind of power of language to a subject that in Silent Spring just has this huge bearing on like all of our everyday lives, and that had a really big impact on me. I think if I had like felt a little bit more confident that like writing was a career that I could follow, a path I could follow, I might have used that as an inspiration to follow that path earlier on, but that wasn't really clear to me at the time. So instead, I was like, I want to pursue environmental science, and then I wanted to be an English professor, and then eventually work my way to writing about the environment with the project I'm working on right now.
Right. Yeah. It's like full circle moment. Um, I remember in like my high school, I took AP environmental science and um, this was referenced, but we didn't read any of it. It was my AP literature class where we read excerpts of it. So I was like, it so works as like expertly in both like fields, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did this impact your relationship with writing? You talked about it a little bit, but how did that jump from environmental science to literature and writing? What was that like?
I think one thing that really struck me, I mean, it's hard to go back and really know, but when I read it now, what strikes me is that she's so passionate about her subject matter. And she's also writing about something that people are pretty unaware of, but that, is kind of devastating to learn. Like, it's devastating to learn that, like, all of your food is being poisoned and like animals are dying, right, which is a huge focus of the book. She actually spends two-thirds of the book on animals before she really gets to, and plants before she gets to humans. But I was just really inspired by the way she kind of took this topic that was so important to her. And even though other people weren't talking about it, even though the authorities at the time, both governmental and corporate authorities, were saying everything is safe, everything is fine, she was using the evidence that she saw, that she found through talking with other people, to create a story that said, actually, there's something else going on here. And I thought that was just such a powerful thing for writing to do, to expose kind of an aspect of our world and our existence that's going on, that you can prove, right, that you can show, but that is so dispersed almost that we're just not really putting all the pieces together to understand the big picture. When I think about it now, like when I'm reading her biography now, it's super interesting to me because I just wrote this book that was about lesbian invisibility. And what I've learned is that, which I did not know in high school, certainly didn't know in my previous readings of this book, is that Rachel Carson had a female partner for like the last or for a significant chunk of her life.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so and it's this woman Dorothy Freeman who's like the love of her life. It's a really sweet story. They exchanged like 900 letters. They spent summers together in Maine.
Oh,
And it's really beautiful, but I'm like, I'm back in my same turf of like, why don't we know this?
right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
even on like the most recent biography of her from 2012, the flap says it writes sensitively about her romantic friendship with Dorothy Freeman. Like, we're still not quite saying what that relationship was for
Right.
whatever reason, and like that's a whole other, right, bag of worms. But what I've been thinking about lately is that there's some connection here between her ability to see and then to speak out about this sort of invisible, denied reality of toxicity. And then her also living in kind of a closeted existence as a queer woman and having sort of her relationship not ever be public, right? And her identity never really be sort of part of the larger reality, right? And then also not seeing other people like her in the world, right? In the 50s, especially in the 50s, because that's when kind of the McCarthy era lavender scare is happening. So, queer people are being fired from their jobs and things like that. So I feel like there's a connection here, and I don't want to make it too simple, but there's a connection between being able to see this kind of large conspiracy of toxicity that no one wants to talk about, and being willing to put that in writing and to put it in like really beautiful writing, but also very like ardent, like passionate language. And then, her identity and her relationship as being something that's kind of hidden and not spoken about.
Yeah. Wow. That is absolutely fascinating. It's like both in her writing and in her life, there's like almost invisible factors that she sees that are encroaching on her way of life, our way of life, that is making it that much harder or that much unhealthier to
Right.
exist.
Yeah.
Is there a passage or sentence that you wanted to read from the
Well,
book?
the sentence that keeps kind of like reverberating in my mind with the project I'm working on is, who would want to live in a world which is just not quite fatal? And she's talking there about basically like the companies that produce the pesticides she's talking about and the government are both saying, this is the like legal limit that we think is safe that won't kill a human, right? Like, so we've tested it in animals and we think like this amount is okay. And like her whole point in the book is about the accumulative nature of these chemicals. So like if you have just a tiny amount from this one vegetable you eat, let's say, but then you also have a tiny amount in your water, and then you also have a tiny amount in this, all of that accumulates, right? So it's not really you can't really estimate a dosage that's even not quite fatal, not quite lethal. But that's kind of the way, that's even to this day, that's sort of how those things are regulated. But she's thinking about it kind of in the larger context of the atomic era and like nuclear weapons development, which dovetails really nicely with what I've been researching. And she's even kind of using some of the metaphors of fallout and radioactivity to try to explain to people at the time, like why they should be concerned. And then what I'm researching now is about some of these like aspects of radioactivity that continue to exist without our awareness, and how those are also, having this cumulative effect. But I think that what strikes me on revisiting the book in this moment and in the middle of this research, and I'm sorry if I'm like a little bit too in the rabbit hole on it.
No, I love it. I'm like learning so much. I absolutely love it. So keep going.
But yeah, what I'm finding so interesting is that like the really basic lesson of Silent Spring is we're all connected. And so if you spray poison over here, it's going to affect everyone, and it's going to kind of move up the food chain and accumulate in bodies over time. And so there's nothing that you can do that's not going to have an effect on everyone else. And it's like we didn't really learn that part. Like this book had a huge impact in that afterward the US banned DDT and banned some of the pesticides she's talking about, like because she spoke up, and then everyone got really upset about it. And it was serialized in the New Yorker, so it had a really wide kind of dispersal through the reading public, and people got really worked up over it, and they actually passed some laws. But when we passed those laws, we just continued to produce those chemicals and then send them to other countries where they're still in use. And so some of those chemicals then come back to us on food that we import. Like you can't really cordon it off. You can't just erect these borders and then imagine that you're safe, which is kind of the whole point. Like that's everything that she was saying back in 1962, you know,
Right.
and we still haven't quite figured that out. So that's a question or an interest that's motivating my writing now, and it's kind of really gotten me way back into this book.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about specifically that you wanted to mention or talk about?
I don't think so. I think I talked
Yeah.
about all.
Yeah, you really got all, like, it all went around in a circle and related to your work, and it's absolutely fascinating, and that's what good writing does. We are inspired by it and then give our own work out in the world. So thank you so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Join the conversation at withoutbooks.org.